And with that, I'll hand over to Matthew Glynn to speak about the contracting playbook, a must-have for in-house teams.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where in the world you are. Thank you for joining another GLS Legal Operations community training session. Today's an outstanding topic. We're going to talk about what is perhaps one of the most profound legal operations transformation assets that can be deployed to support your contracting function. So much so that we consider this a genuine must-have for any in-house legal team, any procurement team, anyone who's in any way, shape or form associated with a contracting function. I want to start off hard. I want to start off straight away with a depiction of what does an optimized contract function look like? What are the key features that if your contracting function was performing really, really well, what would you be seeing? And I think it's important because tools are designed to achieve outcomes. So what is the outcome that we're all looking to achieve with our contracting function? Let me take you on a slight journey, starting with what is the true purpose of a contracting function. Okay. I don't think too many people are actually going to present a view of a contracting function quite the way we're about to. But a contracting function for us at GLS involves a recognition that it's a key corporate asset. Your contracting function is in fact an essential strategic corporate enabler. Why? Well, because it helps your organization secure revenues. It secures your supply chain so that you can trade. It secures funding, and you could add secures, a whole range of things which are essential to your business. But effectively, the contract is the legal basis upon which value in your business is built. If your company was going to be acquired or your company was going to acquire something, what would you be looking at? You would be looking at contracts which evidence the legal value, the legal basis for the value of the asset that you're looking at buying or selling. And yet, contracting functions are rarely ever treated, let alone operated in a way that recognizes this strategic importance, and they're rarely managed in a way that its strategic business building capability can be unleashed for the benefit of the business. Instead, in too many situations, contracting functions or the legal capability that services a contracting function is deemed a cost center. So what would the key features of an optimized contracting function look like? Well, first and foremost, those features belong to a genre, a very important genre of asset. The features of a good contracting function necessarily must align with and enable business priorities. And what are the business priorities that are most valued in any corporate organization? Number one, faster deal-making agility. How quickly can your contracting function close contracts? What's the turnaround time you can achieve when you're mid-negotiation? Achieving a consistent risk profile. Plain English, can your contracts achieve a sensible basis, an acceptable basis for doing business? Reduce legal time costs per contract. Why are we concerned with that? Well, because legal is part of the production costs. No one who manufactures equipment, it has a cavalier or disregard to production costs. Legal is a production cost. Preservation of contract value. What's the point of securing a contract only to see disputes arise or value leak from that? The contract is how we keep value inside the organization. Improve contract performance and administration. Why is that important? Well, if we perform on one deal, we'll get the next. So repeat business. Account value. Contract performance is how we grow the value of the accounts that our businesses serve, if that's how your revenues are defined. But business lead autonomy. A good contract function gives business teams, deal makers, the ability to act with greater autonomy, but safely. What we don't see, they taught us at Harvard, your list of things to do is important, but your list of things is not to do is also important. What don't we see when it comes to the key features of an optimized contracting function? Well, number one, we don't see any requirement that every negotiation that occurs has to result in a legal victory to our side. What we don't see in optimized contracting function is total risk management, where we've sought to identify even the most far-fetched risks and lock down every conceivable risk scenario from playing out. We also don't see lawyers becoming project lead implementers because they are front and center of every aspect of the contracting process. Another observation of an optimized contracting function. Our optimized contracting function recognizes that anything to do with legal is necessarily expensive. It has to be. Law is a complicated area. Do you want someone who's not up to the task? Lawyers tend to be bright, capable, hardworking, ethically moral, responsible people. They cost what they cost. It's a little bit like if you were building an Apple iPhone, you need to use rare earth materials. The materials that go into the human component of a contracting function are expensive. But incumbent upon that is that expensive assets need to be deployed strategically. And strategically means achieving business enabling outcomes. The analogy that we give here is that the cost of a lawyer involved in the contracting process is a little bit like the cost of hiring Lionel Messi to your football team. You don't take that asset and have him carry the kit bag. You don't take that asset as world-class striker and put them in goal. You need them to be where they're creating the most value. In the case of Lionel, apparently he was kicking goals. In the case of the lawyer, it needs to be enabling business outcomes that the business appreciates. The playbook is an extraordinarily important part, repository, vessel, instrument that can help bring the strategic importance and enabling capability of a contracting function to life inside your organization. That's what today's session's about. But into what context are we talking about introducing this tool? In what context should this tool emerge? It's very important to set the scene. And I wanted to spend a minute or two, hopefully out there in virtual Teams land, heads will be nodding. I want to examine the prevalent characteristics that exist for most of us in our in-house roles or procurement roles. So the legal department context, and this is our factual observation, is point one, color popped, second time I've talked about it. Legal is historically expensive. It's an expensive business and it should be because it's complex, we need the right person. So we're dealing with expensive raw materials, and so the incumbent obligation is that they need to work hard and deliver a lot of return on investment to the business. The second point, whether you're in a procurement function or a legal function, okay, is that volumes of work are growing. More is the rule faced by every legal team that we're aware of. But not just more in a very dynamic context of increasing pressure, constantly increasing pressure on performance. We need faster turnarounds. We need reduced costs. There's a global transformation initiative or restructuring or digitization initiative that legal needs to fold into as well. You are constantly chasing ever emerging priorities and new directions. More. Then we have a macro environment of increased regulations. It seems at any point in time, our contracting function is playing catch up. We're pouring a new rinse of GDPR compliant clauses, Sarbanes-Oxley a few years back. Before that, Y2K, now ABC, etc. Now AI related provisions. There's always constant tinkering required with the paper. And the context in which we rise to these challenges is one of constraint. We have finite resources, or in many cases, reduced legal resources. Headcount, budget, and other resources are finite or reducing. Legal department churn is another recent in the last 10 years, dynamic. In-house teams are increasingly impacted by churn amongst legal team. So new bodies, new onboarding, new backfill knowledge requirements. But the most prevalent dynamic, in my view, around the challenges that contracting functions face is actually color-popped, outdated working practices. Increased busyness, how to respond to all of these challenges. The instinctive response from the in-house community has been that of brute force lawyering. How do I bring in additional manpower to address the issue? How do I get more men in the field with shovels as opposed to perhaps considering hiring a tractor for half an hour? The playbook is our tractor. The increasing reliance on brute force lawyering is C.1. Historically, legal is an expensive business. It's not a viable strategy. So what we need to do is looking at reforming outdated working practices and enabling the human capital that's already associated with that contracting function with tools to drive productivity. Let's have a slightly more granular examination of the contracting function. I've said from the outset that contracting is a strategic endeavor, and so too is the playbook. What you have on the screen is one of the 15 core processes that GLS has identified in terms of what makes an in-house legal function perform. This is the contracting function. This is, for many of you, the first DNA level depiction of the critical resource enablers that make up the contracting function. You can see from the start of the contracting function, group legal policy, you'll need a legal services charter, legal services request forms, etc. You can see about in the middle of the screen, playbooks, okay? And all the way to the end where you've got a signed contract goes into contract administration. At your leisure, and the slides will be circulated to you, I want you to carefully come back and examine this DNA strand of your contracting function and ask yourself, do we have the requisite elements that we need to achieve an optimal contracting function? Now, today we're talking about the playbook, and the playbook raises a very interesting question in terms of, is it something that you develop in a linear fashion, i.e. after your checklists, or is it something that's impacted by, influenced by, informed by, and subsequently impacts all of the other elements? Spoiler alert, it's the latter. I'm going to examine now the concept of roles in relation to the contracting function. And I'm going to talk about roles of the contract negotiation, the contract negotiator, and then bring it together in relation to the role of the contracting playbook. Because each of those terms, although relating to distinctly identifiable persons and elements, is kind of one of the same when it comes to an outcome. Because you can't achieve the outcome of an optimal contracting function if you don't have the contract negotiator negotiating in an optimal way and using assets that allow that to occur. So let's explore. Let's go with the role of the contract negotiation / negotiator. At GLS, firstly, everything on this slide is important, but we've nevertheless categorized it into primary and secondary importance factors. Now, the role of the contract negotiation and negotiator, its primary purpose is alignment. It's to test the alignment that can be achieved between parties so the chance of a good deal being done is better realized. The primary purpose of the contractor and the contracting negotiation is to achieve a safe landing. We need to frame the commercial offer that we are taking to market or that we are buying from the market, and we need to place it into an acceptable risk framework. This is not like docking one of Elon Musk's spaceships to the International Space Station. It's not that precise, but we need to land in a safe zone, the commercial offer within an acceptable risk framework. The primary purpose is performance assurance. The contract negotiation needs to deliver a deal that will work. I'm sure that we could all cast our minds back to situations where we've signed something, people celebrate the revenue, and the deal falls asunder. A primary purpose of the negotiation is to secure high quality revenues for the business. It could not be more aligned to what the principles of your business are: generation of profit. Now, all within the bucket of extremely important, there are some secondary roles of the contract negotiation negotiator, and that is to achieve deal velocity, deal speed, what we call deal making agility. We need our contracting function to help close deals efficiently. KPI metric that we refer to describe this is contract time compression ratios. Legal is an input to the production of whatever it is that you sell, so we need to manage production costs. Negotiations, how they're conducted, who conducts them, with what they conduct them, is a production cost. We need to reduce the cost profile of the legal component of revenue production. Process improvement. Contracting in a dynamic market necessarily needs to be dynamic, continual improvement. Contractors and the contract negotiation is also a bridge function. Legal may coordinate certain aspects, but what are we coordinating? We're coordinating finance, we're coordinating implementers, we're coordinating operational aspects, etc. And we're coordinating from one organization to many. Okay? All of these outcomes are best achieved if everybody on our team understands the play. How are we going to do all of this in an optimized fashion? These challenges, these outcomes can be immeasurably more attainable by the playbook. The playbook, its purpose, is to allow you to deliver your best performance each and every time, regardless of whether you are using your most senior negotiator or someone who's just joined your team or a junior that's cycling through your legal function. The playbook, its principal value is not to make sure you win every legal point. That's largely irrelevant. We need to land in the safe zone. It's to make sure that everybody's singing on an agreed hymn sheet. We know what legal's position is. We know what finance position is. We know what issues can be agreed, can't be agreed. We know when to escalate. The team is aligned and no dividing and conquer, which we see happen so many times. Legal have their offline, commercial have their offline huddle. They agree things. They forget to tell legal. Everybody is working in contrary direction as opposed to a consistent one. The playbook codifies, it standardizes. It makes the legal and commercial positions that make up the common hymn sheet understood. Everybody's aware of it. It clarifies the play. What is our authorized strategy? What is important to us? What do we shoot for? But every basketball we throw at the net doesn't necessarily go through. Not everything's a three-point score. So we need strategic maneuverability. But strategic maneuverability doesn't mean concession. It means we have a large target zone, a large safe area in which to land our deals. Okay, so strategic maneuverability, default clauses, deviation options are critical, because what's not on our list of an optimized contracting function is a legal team that must win each and every point. What's not on there is that we must manage each and every risk. Strategic maneuverability is a phenomenally important concept. Outcome realization. The winning arguments to justify key positions are critical. Usually the best negotiator is the one that can speak with relevant examples as to how risks that justify a particular position manifest in the context of this industry, our organization as it participates in the industry. Okay. Winning arguments and experience do not need to have lived firsthand. As long as we can understand and share those experiences, we can speak just as authoritatively. Critically, the playbook also allows, and I picked up on this on our introduction comments to this slide, a leveling up effect. Have you noticed inside the organization, particularly say if you are competing for projects, reviewing RFPs, etc., there is intense pressure to get the most senior legal representative onto your case. There's a kind of a slumping of shoulders if you end up getting a more junior lawyer. However, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a senior, a junior, or mid-level, anyone that involves in law tends to be very quick learners, tends to be quite hardworking, quite intelligent. By giving them a tool that gives them everything that they need to present the best version of your company's arguments and positions, you achieve a leveling up effect. So by utilizing the playbook, every member of the legal team can punch above their weight, but the playbook can also be used by the business teams, subject to confidentiality issues, which we'll touch on later. Leveling up, everyone's playing a division. Streamlines. By having consolidated into the playbook tool what our ceiling is and what our floor is and how far left and how far right we can go, that will be a reflection of approvals that we don't have to constantly apply for. Dynamic improvement. The playbook becomes the repository of the best of our organization. Okay, our best articulation of the risks and how we can help counterparties get comfortable with risks or dilute their perception that a risk exists. We need to continually feed this. It's a dynamic tool. We'll have a slide on maintenance protocols, which we'll share. Now, I would say that the playbook from a contracting function point of view is the second most important contract function asset. I say that only because a contracting parameters policy document which says this defines the safe area is the head of the river Ganges. It's the source of the river Ganges. Okay. But once you have a contracting policy, this is what our positions are on liabilities, indemnities, warranties, etc. The playbook then very quickly becomes the most important contract function area. I go back to the title of today's theme. It's a must-have for any legal and procurement function. Let's now talk a little bit about what it takes to make a good playbook. We have extensive white papers available on the GLS Legal Operations Knowledge Center, all of which is free for you to access on the playbook. In fact, we're even going to show you what a playbook looks like. You can take our frameworks and you can do it yourself and make it. But these are, after implementation, are the salient, the key principles that make up a good playbook. Everything on this slide is critical. So these are not necessarily listed out in order of importance. Navigable. If your playbook cannot be picked up and very quickly the response to the issue that is being discussed is not able to be located and it's ineffectual, you've got to get your user of your playbook on point as quickly as possible. Second point, playbooks should not just be a esoteric discourse about legal issues in abstract. Playbooks need to be clause aligned. That is, they must relate to the legal clauses that you actually use, ideally, when you're able to sort your paper. A playbook is not a checklist. It's how do I secure an outcome, particularly on your own paper. Who uses the playbook is a very important design determinant. It will impact the design of the playbook. Now, we've talked about in the previous slide the leveling up utility that it can bring, but the playbook must accommodate all levels of experience. So necessarily it must be pitched towards your most junior team member. Could be most junior legal team member, but then it could also be for someone who's not in the legal team at all. Okay, so simplicity becomes a point as on a standalone basis. Your language must be simple, it must be brief enough so that it can be consumed in real time and applied in real time. We're not a law firm, but as short as humanly possible is a key design feature of a playbook. Studies show in terms of effective checklists and how to respond, tools such as what to do inside a cockpit emergency situation, you cannot be reading prose. You know, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. No, check engine, fire, no fire. It needs to be as short as humanly possible. We can't work efficiently in real time in the heat of negotiations with phone book-like assets. It also needs to be beautiful. This is a subtle but powerful point. If you are going to develop a playbook that you want people who are used to working in a particular way and you want to influence in a more positive way, you need assets that are pleasing to work with, short as possible to read, simple, but also beautiful. Okay, so there are design aesthetics that can be manipulated to improve the receptivity and therefore the uptake and therefore the potency of your playbook. Playbooks need to be high utility. What do I mean? Your first playbook should not be an attempt to work out what your play is for every single conceivable commercial or legal issue that you'll encounter in every conceivable commercial agreement you might enter into. We know from studying the data, there are 8 issues globally that determine 90% of the world's commercial litigation arising out of a contract. Why not start with those? Pareto's principle, 20% account for 80%. Okay. So pick on issues for your playbook that are going to be relevant to all of your commercial agreements, because if you're in the contracting space, your paper, regardless of whether you're procuring facilities management services or whether it's an NDA, you should be delivering within, the 80% standard deviation curve, a consistent legal risk contracting risk profile. A good playbook is one which is designed to be receptive to constant updating. Let's go visual. Okay, features of a good playbook. Let's focus on the key clauses. Okay, we don't need a play on whether we accept smoke signals or carrier pigeons for notification clauses, but we certainly do need to know what our position is on indirect loss. Negotiability. Okay, the tool has got to help us negotiate the point. This will influence the context. Objection. We get objections all the time. Some are frivolous, right? Some are spawned from ignorance, but some are legitimate. We need to cover the full spectrum of objection rebuttals. We don't need all of that full spectrum documented on day one because we can keep adding them as we encounter them. Irritant strategies. There are some negotiators out there who are academically and intellectually lazy. Okay, you're a customer. The supplier's doing is providing the service. They are responsible for delivery. They therefore control risk, and you might be entitled to certain indemnities. Why should someone just automatically, well, if you've asked for them, then you also have to give them? It's a nonsense. It's a lazy intellectual argument. Risk status. Not all issues are burning hot red issues. Some are amber, some are, not particularly important. So we need to have a sense of sifting through the key risks and understanding what risks represent to the business. Practical negotiation tips. It's not just what the position that we want to achieve, but how do we get there? So that involves objecting, rebuttals to objections, but also making persuasive cases on how to achieve it. No man is an island, the metaphoric poet John Donne. It's the same in contracting. A legal person or a procurement person can't themselves represent the entire organization without having consulted, in many cases, the operational side, the insurance side, the tax side, the finance side. So it's incumbent upon the playbook to identify who the internal experts are for the agreement types that the playbook supports. Business sensitivities. There will be, in any business, some hot button issues that are particularly prevalent for that business, and we need to be aware of what those are. I'll give you a small example. Major MNCs who have experienced, as an example, data protection breaches that have played out in the public domain, you're probably going to find that their approach to those issues going forward are a little bit more sensitive than they were pre-breach. Negotiation North Stars. What is the strategy? What is the team trying to move towards, right? That can be in a generalized sense, and then it could also be in terms of key positions. Learning zone, right? We need to have a tiered fallback position. Now, this is a double-edged sword because strategic maneuverability, which I've talked about, is what makes up your safe landing zone. But one of the adverse cultural behaviors of a playbook, particularly for commercial users, is, well, if our starting point is 1, but I know I can slide back to 2 and ultimately agree 3, I want to get this deal done, so I'm just going to offer 3. Problem with that is if they don't accept 3, because some people will say no as a strategy in order to build up a stock of points they can trade away later, where do you fall back from 3? Okay, interesting behavioral observation for another day. Escalation pathways, but also golden rules as well. So we've talked about the features that go into the design. We've talked about the features of a good playbook. Let's see one. Okay, here's one. Screenshot it if you like. Don't even need to worry about it because we're going to send it to you. That's what we do at GLS. So in this particular playbook, this particular dashboard for this is for the issue of warranties and representations. Now, I'm going to just quickly step through this and I'm going to point to the design features that have been addressed. Well, the first one was accommodating all user levels. So, and a senior lawyer doesn't need an explanation around what a warranty is, but a new team member or a non-business user might. So we have a simple plain English purpose statement. And that's important because how many times have we heard our colleagues in the commercial teams talk about indemnities as though that's popcorn to be handed out, right? As opposed to a very, very powerful legal risk transfer instrument. The next thing is the development of that is a breakdown. So we're informing the key elements of what these clauses and these issues turn on. So we have a key element clause. It's a snapshot of what are the big ticket issues that will come up if you have to negotiate this clause. Then we have a clear statement in terms of what's our strategy? What are we trying to achieve here? And as you can see in the first line here, we're requesting a reasonable range of warranties that are customary and proportionate. Okay, so we've set the tone for our negotiation. You can calibrate your strategy depending on your industry, your sector, your appetite for risk, etc. We then have a play how to negotiate. Okay, well, we're going to review our strategy, we're going to consult the playbook, we're going to ask the expert, and we're going to seek for L1 for sign off for any change. I'm going to come to that in a second. We have an experts box on the dashboard whereby for the purpose of this agreement, who is the person that you need to speak to? If an issue comes up that falls outside the play, who do I need to go speak to? Just having that information to hand makes you a much better team. Additional instructions, it allows you to pick up on any sensitivities that might exist to the agreement. Now, one of the other design features that I told you is essential is that the playbook must relate to actual legal language. The most powerful part of this playbook, arguably, is the ceiling, the floor, the left and the right. Now we capture this with an L1, 2, 3 scenario. Now, L1 is language that simply cannot be amended. That makes it easy for our commercial teams. This is a don't touch. L2 can be principles must be preserved, but the word may differ. Example, the quick brown fox jumped over the log can be agreed on by reference to language. The log was jumped over by the fast-moving brown fox. The intention and principle is preserved. And then L3 is language in a contract that, it's nice to have, but it's not essential. So our playbook has informed what the issue is, what the key elements that we're going to encounter, what our strategy is, how we're going to negotiate it, any additional instructions, and we know who we need to consult. And then we go one step further. Boom. In the first column is the actual language of the clause. And the color coding is anything in red we can't touch, anything in blue we can. But we need to preempt objections. So in this case, this is a customer-specific customer-specific playbook. We're preempting what the supplier may or may not say. If I draw your attention to 15.2 here, we're anticipating responses which range from we don't offer any representations and warranties, or they're too broad, or we can't do that. And then how do we justify? We have a range of techniques, okay? We ask probing questions, okay, and guidance on how to approach the answer. We make statements, okay, so warranties and representations are customary agreements, right? We require this of any supplier, etc. And then we could have some options in terms of how we pivot and change it. This framework is money in the bank, okay? Take a screenshot, look at what we send through. This we know from over a decade of successful implementation is going to save your contracting functions. If you operate, more than 300 contracts per year, this is going to save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of time cost by improving your contract closure ratios. Okay. Now, when it comes to creating your playbook, we want to offer a simple guide. Some of this is just picking up on concepts that we've covered before, but I wanted it all in the one place, okay? Firstly, start with your foundation clauses. Start what we call the 10+2, okay? Pick on those legal clauses that account for most potential for turbulence, okay? That which is disputed, that is which is litigated. Those clauses that account for most of the time spent in your negotiations historically. You haven't spent weeks, if not months, negotiating provisions pertaining to notice requirements, okay? But you certainly have had discussions around liability and the extent of warranties and the like. When creating your playbook, and this is why I said the playbook could be the second most important asset, you do need to have what we call a group legal policy or a group legal position, right? Whereby you define what your ceiling, your floor, and your left and right is. Every contract function really needs to start with that foundational asset, which says this is the safe landing zone, because that makes up what the mandate of the legal team is. That makes up the content of your agreements. Everything should be designed to achieving. So I said it's the primary obligation of the contract negotiator to achieve a safe landing, okay? You obviously then need to define tolerances, okay? What is your L1, 2, and 3? And these things can be dynamically adjusted. The temptation for many people when they get their first playbook is to make everything an L1 or L2, which is, by and large, self-defeating. Okay, not it's always a limited number of issues that determine the arbitration of risk. You need a legal baseline. Okay, you need legal to define suggested positions on all playbook content features, and then you need to calibrate tools. Okay, this is a tool that will be in the hands of not just legal but also the business. So it's incumbent upon you to seek input from your stakeholders as to what should be included. Payment, the mechanics, the lawyer will draft it, but the commercial terms, the treatment of tax, they are directions that come from outside of legal. So we need to calibrate the tools through collaboration with our stakeholders, okay? So we know what the role of the playbook is. We know what the key features of an optimized contracting function are. We know what the design determinants are. We've seen a playbook. Right, we've got some principles we just shared in relation to developing your playbook. How do we launch a playbook? And this is worthy of a few comments, because if your corporate environment is like so many, you're going to be in an environment where there are so many people trying to stand up a new internal initiative that there is new initiative fatigue. And as such, it's pretty hard to get people to take you seriously, right? So the first and foremost step, if you are a legal sponsor or a procurement sponsor, is you need initiative legitimacy. And what you need to do here is effectively, and this is, miss this step at your own peril, is that you need to make the business ask you for a playbook response. You need to ask the business to give you need the business to ask you to give them what you know they need. Okay. Now this could be achieved through an 8-question desktop survey, which takes under 45 seconds for a business user to respond. Humor me. Would you like A, faster contract closure times, B, slower contract times, C, don't care? what do you think they're going to choose? But if you're able to go through key questions like, would you like to see would you like to see us present more convincing arguments to support the positions required by your business unit? Yes or no? Okay, so just take those 2 points. The data point that becomes 97% of 400 business users said they would like faster contract closure times. 100% of business users said that they would like to have more potent arguments available to them to make their case more convincing. Okay, you have a data-based request from the business, which is the legitimacy for your playbook initiative. Second point, you need to build a playbook alongside the business, but that doesn't mean you draft by committee. Okay, you know what needs to go into the legal provisions. Okay, but you consult the business in the following circumstances where you know you can show them something that they're going to say, yeah, that's great, that's exactly what I want, or where there's a genuine requirement to say, is it 60-day payment terms or is it 30-day payment terms, or if it's like GLS, it's pay in advance. Okay, so we aren't really interested in what our business users view is on what our legal policy should be, right? But we do need to, because it's a tool they will use and it's a tool to support them on their outcome, we want to involve them in the process so that they feel as though they are invested in it. We need to introduce playbooks slowly. Okay, slowly catch a monkey. You should always pick the coalition of the willing, right? Pick the most receptive teams first who you think will benefit from the playbook. And usually these are the ones that you've consulted, and have those people champion the initiative for you. 100 times out of 100 at GLS, that strategy has always worked, and they become ferocious proponents of the expansion of the playbook in terms of content covered, but also users using them. Provide training sessions. In less than an hour, you can have an extraordinarily fun, engaging session where you introduce the new playbook asset, plus take it for a test drive. Break your teams up into different groups and run playbook scenarios where you refer to those arguments in real time. And you'll find by the second or third go over, a lot of these principles just really start to stick and flow more logically. Integrate your playbook into your contract templates and tools, both online and offline. Now, the online-offline distinction is this, because your playbook, if it goes online, there we mean if you're leveraging a CLMS platform, etc., and they're going to have clause repositories, they're going to have template repositories, they're going to have, in some cases, a portion of the platform whereby parties can edit and negotiate the document together. So you have to think about how the resource is going to integrate inside that. For my money, don't get too involved in trying to shoehorn a playbook asset into any CLMS function. I think the CLMS world has got a few iterations that it must cycle through before it's going to be genuinely a high water mark and enabling optimal contracting functions. So keep your playbook separate for now. Make it easy to access and intuitive to read. We've covered off on that, and that's a strong case right there. But don't try and start off with a playbook that covers 50 issues. Start with 5, build up to 10, okay? And that'll cover 80% of the scenarios that you need. Encourage feedback from your negotiators, okay? So when it's used, harvest their feedback because it's incredibly valuable. Track adoption and outcomes. Never deploy a playbook unless you've done some baselining in terms of existing contract closure data, because unquestionably the playbook is going to show many hundreds, if not thousands of hours per quarter for most MNCs. And I can see from the audience demographics, most of us are working in bigger companies. You need to evidence that saving for the business. In terms of the time cost that your team spends putting these together, or if you want to fast circuit that and take a standard playbook from us and then just white label it and contour it yourself, you'll be looking at ROI anywhere from 30x to 1000x, and that's just a fact. Okay. Key thing in launching your playbook too, and I cannot leave this slide without emphasizing this, is that this is such an important strategic asset Could you imagine the consequences if you left your playbook, a hard copy of it, on the table in a negotiation and the other side read it? Okay. You have to avoid that at all costs. So it's an extraordinarily confidential asset. And as such, we tend to advocate that playbooks need to stay online. And it's sufficient if your playbook is hosted on something as simple as SharePoint, because you've got access controls, you've got viewer, audit logs, etc. Okay, so keep it online. Okay, playbook maintenance. We're in the home straight here. I'm going to get you out on time and with a few minutes for questions. Playbook maintenance. It's a living document, not a static one. You do need to schedule reviews, but I don't know about you. I'm scratching my head and thinking, how did we get to the back end of September when a few minutes ago, the year was just waking up in January? Okay. So whilst it might be tempting to say that we should regularly update this playbook 3 times a year, if you did it 1 time per year or 2 times per year, you are absolutely achieving a world-class gold standard. Okay. So a lot can be achieved just by, here's the playbook, have you got any feedback on these clauses, or where do you think improvement is? You could capture this feedback by an online data form, but actually it's always a wonderful opportunity to go and talk to your key users and say, hey, how do you think we can improve this, or what arguments did you play? Now, the lawyers, we are the doers inside the contracting function. As and when you hear a great argument, whether it's from your side of the table or someone else's side of the table, make a note of it and just put it aside. And then when you do your annual or biannual playbook refresh, you can have those notes there, and maybe you can make an editorial decision to incorporate it. So capture lessons from escalations, particularly, right? If something's escalated, then it's definitely important. It's an outlier. Let's capture that. Watch out for legal and regulatory changes. We've talked about that in terms of the constant headwinds. If there's not GDPR, there'll be GDPR 2, there'll be GDPR 3. There's always something going to come down the pipe. We're in a more increasingly regulated world, not less. Involve your business stakeholders in the refresh and ensure that you have clear version control and ownership. Okay. If you spend the time to invest in this asset, preserve it. It just makes sense. Okay. This is sort of a more conceptual point, but I think it's an important one. I just wanted to contextualize or add a little bit more commentary around the DNA representation of the contracting function, and posit some thoughts around how the playbook features in legal department transactions and transformation. The question, a key characterization or question that we have around a playbook is it the tail that wags the dog, or is it the dog wagging the tail? Because having just cycled you through what it should do, what should be included, and how to develop it, etc., you can see that there are other critical resource elements that appeared on that contracting function line that clearly are impacted by the playbook, or the playbook is going to be impacted by those resources. Okay. So it's both, right? A playbook will influence how you negotiate. It will influence the final form of what's signed. But equally, the playbook is going to be influenced by, did you document your contracting parameters? Okay. Did you come up with a checklist of this is key issue, etc.? Okay. So the playbook is an optimized contracting function asset that if you haven't done all of these other things that would implement or shape your playbook, just be mindful that if you write what your position is on liability, but you don't have a contracting policy which defines your position on liability, you're developing 2 of those critical resource enablers at the same time. And it may be that in formulating your playbook, you've just produced a necessary chapter for your group legal policy. Okay. If you've got a group legal policy and developing a playbook, make sure that the group legal policy is reflected in your playbook. So just to recap that, in case I've lost anyone, hopefully not. Ideally, your playbook is linked to already defined GLP positions, but if it's not, be mindful that in producing your playbook, you are in effect defining official group legal policy positions. So recognize that and capture that second asset. It should relate to standardized contracting templates. And if it doesn't, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty deploying that. Okay, I've told you what the goal is, but this is how you achieve it. The manipulation of L1, L2, L3 directions that even your business team can understand. Okay. So when you think about your group legal policy and you start with those 10 clauses, maybe that's the time that you standardize those 10 clauses so that you can make your playbook even more powerful. But then those standard 10 clauses can go be washed into and update all of your contracting templates, and you start leveraging standardization throughout your contracting inventory, whether it's your paper or otherwise. So ideally, it's linked to those three things. So if you haven't got it, it's not a reason not to do your contracting playbook, but be mindful that the residual of doing your contracting playbook is the creation of these other very important assets, which is an excellent outcome. Now, your playbook, once optimized, is then going to have a trajectory effect. It's going to influence like a planet. There's going to be moons that it influences. Okay. Now, the CLMS functionality. So if you're using one of these one of these systems, what goes into your playbook will also become rules that are incorporated into your CLMS. Bear that in mind, because by doing and creating your playbook, you are doing some of the necessary work that you need to leverage CLMS and other technologies. Okay. So AI tools, everyone's abuzz with news and excitement about, mostly hubris in my view, what these AI tools can do. Okay, it can do amazing things, but it can largely do what you ask it to do. So if you haven't asked it to identify these risks and respond in a way that your playbook would direct, and you haven't got your playbook, how are you going to get maximum productivity expression from these AI tools? Okay. User training. So how you negotiate things, whether it's legal team, business team, your playbook is going to influence your training agenda. All right. So, if the assets optimize, it's going to drive consistency across your regions. It's going to strengthen risk governance. It's going to position legal as a business enabler. I'm going to flip in the last few minutes of this a little bit like Harvard. All right. Well, what's the upside of having it? But what's the downside of not having it? If you are still in, and please don't be upset with me, but if you're still in the dark ages of whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, but operating as though legal is a cost center, right? What are the costs of not having a playbook? This question needs to be asked because legal is not a cost center. Legal, particularly the contracting function, is a business enabler, and when it does things right, it increases business agility, it saves time and saves costs. So basically, an initiative like a playbook is a business investment that shows massive return on investment, and as a multiple, literally outperforms anything in terms of multiples that can be achieved. If you can spend $10,000 developing a playbook and it saves your organization $2 million a year, there is no investment division inside your company that achieves those kind of returns. Okay. But the costs of not having one are clear. Poor contracting efficiency. What does that drive? Slow business agility. Suboptimal contracting outcomes. Poor deal quality. Loss of revenue. Not having one. Unnecessarily inflated legal costs, weaker compliance standards, which manifest in terms of costs. It could be we don't want to do business with you, through to a regulatory fine and everything in between. The inability to capture and leverage know-how. Okay, so someone's really, really good. That's great, but what that person knows could also make everybody else really, really good. Okay, so you're failing to leverage the return on investment on expensive team members. Diminished legal function value recognition. If you aren't taking assets that draw, and remember the primary purpose, alignment between the contracting function and what the business needs, which is more deals, faster, better, safer, cheaper. Okay. So consider when you're making your case for a playbook, as obvious as it is, you need to be thinking about it in terms that the business will understand. Okay. Will this initiative increase our business making agility? Yes, it will. What time can we save? And what does the financial value of that represent? And then to really emphasize, right, is, but there's the upside, but here's the downside if we don't do it. And for that reason, we've included reference there, 20 reasons why a contracting playbook is essential. And I recommend that to you. The link will be sent to you. So conclusions, wrapping it up. A playbook and a contracting function They're synonymous with each other. It's an incredibly potent strategic corporate tool, and that's just a fact. Okay. The constant headwinds that a contracting function faces demands tool-enabled responses. Unlike going out and buying Ironclad or Ariba or any of these fancy systems, which are great systems, but they're complex implementations and they're expensive, the contracting playbook is within reach. It's not a luxury. It's one of those items that can actually help you survive, but in helping you survive, it helps you flourish from all of the adoption, the enhanced adoption capability that you have. You've worked out what your play is, your standardized clauses, etc. So playbooks really are a small fraction of the headlines we've covered. Increases your speed, delivers a much more consistent contracting experience, empowers your negotiators. It frees up legal capacity to what we like to think of is move towards higher value problem solving. It empowers your business teams to take things further themselves, which is what they want. We're not shutting the doors and saying you're on your own. We're saying independent, move things faster, but within safety rails. Supports transformation and automation, mitigates risks, improves governance. So in summary, I'm really hoping I've made my case here. The playbooks are critical steps into modern legal operations. And frankly, if you think that you can operate without one, you're continuing to perpetuate flat earth legal department management practices. The world's moved on. Now, how can we help? Well, hopefully this session's helped. Hopefully this session's helped a lot. If you go on to the GLS Legal Operations Center and put in playbooks, you will see both the resources that are available, commercial resources and the knowledge resources, and there's a ton of it allow you to self-educate. If you are like most in-house teams or procurement departments, you're going to be resource stretched and you're going to be attention stretched. If you're a sensible organization and you are focusing on balanced, reasonable commercial risk, you can find fully developed clause banks, both customer and supplier based. And we always recommend starting there because it allows you to traverse more of the legal issue domain landscape than working on, say, a full forwarders derivatives contract. Okay, you'll find fully worked up clause banks having balanced reasonable positions and very comprehensive, potent, influencing, persuasive arguments. There's training solutions, there's playbook, moat, and there's protocol. Read the Ultimate Guide to Legal Operations. Tap into the knowledge, and we have thousands of white papers on our site reflecting the views that we've canvassed from 24,500 in-house lawyers. Visit the tube map, okay? DNA level understanding of your contracting function. What I showed you on the screen was one of the 15 things. Roll in our boot camp, right? And we've also, together with the wonderful folks at the Dubai Legal Affairs Department, launched a certification in legal operations training, and we have modules specifically dedicated to contract function optimization. When the slide deck gets to you, which it will very shortly after this session, there'll be barcodes for downloading the Ultimate Guide, registration for the Legal Operations Center, which takes you about 30 seconds. The tube map will instantly be available to you through the barcode, and the details about our transformation course. That's it. I really hope that this has been a hugely helpful topic to you. Slides are on their way. Nick, do we have any questions?
Hi, Matt. Thanks. Thanks very much for the presentation. Yes, we do have a couple of quick questions, if you could. First one is, should we have a specific playbook for every template in our template library, or have one playbook to cover all customer scenarios?
Yeah, brilliant. The short answer to that is potency, okay? Most legal departments can have anywhere up to and exceeding 30 legal templates, which is just far too many. Yet disputes have been proven to relate to a maximum, more often than not, 8 issues. So from a contract risk profile management perspective, your position on the key provisions that arbitrate risk, so the indemnities, warranties, termination, etc., should be consistent, should be defined in a group legal policy, and then it should be reflected in all the templates that you produce, and it should be reflected in the arguments to which you use to respond to other people's templates. So as a first step, we believe that the playbook should relate to those core issues that are omnipresent and they are most influential in arbitrating risk under the agreements that you negotiate, that account for most of the time you spend negotiating with counterparties. So the first playbook is absolutely categorically a high utility playbook, and we normally recommend that unless you are a supplier, right, you should start with a customer perspective. But obviously, if you're in the supply side, then you develop your supplier version. And I'm talking about volume of contracts for most organizations, apart from revenue contracts for consumable commodities. The supply chain is going to throw up most of those the greatest volumes. That'll mean you're either a customer or supplier. So just to summarize, 100% first one needs to be a generic high utility one that you can use no matter what your playbook are. Now, if you're a massive organization and you have discrete business divisions, or the volume of per contract type is so great that there is an argument for it, then absolutely you can pivot the playbook so that it either adopts a module for that particular agreement, and you can see the one that I demonstrated on the screen had the ability to support 3 specific agreements, right, but in a uniform way, or you can have standalone ones. What I dislike about standalone ones, and everybody that manages more than 2 templates will know this challenge, is even though an agreement is different, most of it's the same. And if you update something in one agreement, you need to then wash it through multiple other agreements. Now, unless you're using technology such as we use at GLS, where we have an automated clause bank that we make one keystroke and then every one of our templates is updated, which makes updating a snack, most of you won't have that, okay? So it's a very difficult and time-consuming task to update multiple agreements. You don't want to have that same challenge associated with multiple playbooks, the point that I made. Hopefully that gives the asker of that question what they need.
Great.
What else
Thanks
did you
so
have for us,
much. Last one is, you mentioned that a playbook feeds AI tools. Could you please explain a bit more about how it does that exactly?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to be too trite here, but AI contract software tools are basically just giant control Fs, or think of it a golden retriever that you throw a stick and it'll bring it back to you. These tools effectively are very, very good at identifying concepts, right? Most of them are based around, they're powerful because control F will only find the character string that you put in, whereas using large language models, AI contract tools will take, effectively synonyms, okay? So indemnity was you'll reimburse, or at your expense, or offset, they're all indemnity related concepts. So the playbook, in part, well, what are the issues that you're concerned about, will inform the AI tool, okay, what to look for, right? In part, okay, it's not the main determinant. But once the issue is found, right, once the golden retriever is brought back the stick, what do you do with it? Okay, now the first gen of contract review tools will give you in context advice. So they found the issue, and then it's for the lawyer to determine how you respond, make the edit. Okay, so we'll set our liability at 300 times contract price. Okay. Now, the new versions of AI contract review, which have generative redlining capabilities, you've got to tell them what to do in that response, but you also have to prioritize what they do. So initially go for 300,000. If that's rejected, 200,000. If that's rejected, 100,000. If that's rejected, you need to escalate, right? So if you haven't worked out your position offline, i.e. in your playbook, how are you going to get maximum productivity expression online using these tools? So this is the point that we make to everybody who we work with in GLS, and to our community. Pump the brakes on all of this. Let me go straight to an advanced technology. You go there when you're ready. If you haven't defined the kind of rules and logic and responses that are in a offline playbook, you have absolutely no business, none, looking at these tools. And if you think that the if you think that the out of the box version of this software, which will say, Graham Adams, US contract review suggests this, that's his view. He doesn't work for your organization. They might not be aware of the sensitivities, might be aware of your jurisdictional nuance, might not be aware of market specific nuances, etc. Okay, so you've got to put the work in. And it's for that reason, Nick, that I said that the playbook absolutely influences the trajectory and the productivity expression that AI-based tools and other forms of legal tech can deliver for your legal department, and then your legal department delivering value for your business.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. And with that, I think we'll draw the webinar to a close. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance, and have a great day.
Outstanding. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.